All right, and we are back off the bench. Justin Kinner, Elliot Rearing, Jacob Tissett, Casey McAllister, off and rolling here on a Wednesday. Part of the storyline with the contract negotiations, or the contract extensions, if you will, for Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase, the unique talking point that kind of stemmed from it was, of course, that we knew that Tee Higgins parted ways with his original representation with in the middle of the season, and of course, I got the same agent as Jamar Chase, and figured that the tea leaves had started to kind of form that maybe there is a chance. We had all kind of given up on the idea of Tee playing for the Bengals past this previous season. But then all of a sudden, people started buying in. Joe Burrow got very vocal after that Cowboys game, all of a sudden harping on the need of Tee Higgins, and then he has an agent representation change, and then it's the same representation of Jamar Chase, and then Jamar Chase is saying how much they need to keep Tee Higgins. That's really when it started kind of snowballing and kind of getting people to buy back into the fact that Tee could be with the Bengals past the 2024 season. So they finally get the deal done this past weekend, but a lot of reporting started coming out that, well, it basically became a Jamar Chase. You knew he was going to get his deal. You knew he was going to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. He had been letting it be known for well over a year that he wanted to reset the market. He couldn't wait for Justin Jefferson to get paid because that was going to reset the market, and that would get him paid more. Well, then it became not just about being the highest paid wide receiver in football. It was about becoming the highest paid non-quarterback in football, and he got that. But part of the negotiations within that was, I'm going to sign here, but I'm not signing a damn thing until you get the extension done with Tee Higgins. And having the same representation kind of made that very much simpler to do, at least on their end, made things very difficult for the Bengals, of course. But you do have to wonder, if the Bengals' arm is not twisted, is Tee Higgins a Bengal? And if they don't have that approach, or now because they had that approach and it gets done that way, what's the likelihood that we see more of this type of thing moving forward, where you have agents who have players who want to play together and use that as leverage to get deals done with teams? Hey, you really want this guy? You can have him, but you also have to sign this guy over here as well. Do you see this being a pattern moving forward in a copycat league like the NFL?
Tee Higgins is only a Bengal because of two things, and one of them is certainly what you're saying right there, Jamar Chase kind of putting him under his wing, saying this is a package deal in terms of these negotiations. The other thing is Joe Burrow's media tour, and I think both of those were pretty unique to this situation. How often do we see players across the league go on a campaign publicly basically against their front office about the plans that they want for pending free agents? We don't see that very often, especially at the volume in which Joe Burrow was doing it. So I think both those things are incredibly unique to this negotiation with Cincinnati and Tee Higgins, and I don't think it gets done without it. Tee said almost as much yesterday in the press conference. He thanked Joe Burrow time and time again for going through that media tour, said without stepping up after the game in Dallas, saying Tee's a need, without going and pushing that over the summer, then Tee Higgins probably wouldn't be back. He basically said that yesterday, and I think that's a huge thing. The point with him and Jamar being a package deal, they asked him about their friendship yesterday at the press conference, and Tee kind of jumped on the question and said that they're just as good friends off the field as they are on the field. They work so well together. They help each other out, all that stuff. And then I believe it was Charlie Goldsmith asked why that's such a unique thing among elite wide receivers in the league. And Jamar Chase said, because you're taking away from production. With one guy being great, having a great wide receiver too, neither of you can reach the goals statistically that necessarily you want to reach, but as a team, you have a greater chance to win a championship. And I think especially at the wide receiver position, it's very rare that players would be willing to sacrifice production. We talk about the diva wide receiver all the time as the archetype for the wide receiver one, and I don't think those guys, more often than not, are going to be willing to sacrifice to be a 1A to a 1B when they can be dominant elsewhere. We have two guys in Cincinnati, not that Jamar Chase ever sacrifices. He won a Triple Crown, and Tee Higgins has shown that he's been able to put up 1,000-yard seasons before, so they can both be immensely successful, but they are both sacrificing, whether that's in dollar signs or production that they could have somewhere else. They're taking somewhat of a step back when they could both be dominant, pure number ones on a different team. And I just don't think relationships like this big three we have in Cincinnati are common enough for this to be something that's used elsewhere. Will players grab other guys and say, if you want to extend me, go get him as well? Maybe. But I think in the sense that we saw Jamar and Tee work, I think that's incredibly unique. And I think this is why a lot of us had confidence that the recessions would be made by these guys to come back, because we knew we wouldn't be able to match top market value for all these players. We did with Jamar, and Tee took a little bit off that deal. And the only reason he did that, he said, is because he grew up a Bengals fan, and it's because he loves these guys. And those were the points that everyone outside of Cincinnati kept saying didn't matter the whole time, and Bengals fans were holding on to. And I think that's really what got it across the finish line. But the uniqueness of this relationship is what kept these guys in town. And I think it's exactly that. I think it's incredibly unique.
I don't think you're going to see another scenario out there where, you know, two guys are so intertwined with one another in the fact that the vibe, their job they work so close together, and they want to make their careers or have their careers with one another.
Yeah.
You know, I think in today's sports landscape, you're seeing it in college, you're seeing it everywhere. You want to make as much money as possible. It doesn't matter where that location is. It doesn't matter who your teammates are. You just want to make as much money as possible. I will say, if there are people out there, and sports agents, there's a lot of similar sports agents. We were talking about it this morning. You know, Scott Boras. Scott Boras has got a ton of clients, right? Well, maybe there's a couple Reds out there that are like, listen, I want to be in Cincinnati, so does player X, and we're not going to sign a deal with you unless you bring us both here, unless we're both together. I don't know how often that's going to happen in sports, and certainly in baseball you're going to see it less because obviously markets, so there's some small market teams that are not going to be able to do it. But in the NFL, where you have the money, you have the salary cap, I do think there's a chance that some guys will start to team up. I'm not going to rule that out. And if anybody was out there right now that has a similar agent with a teammate and they're very close to that teammate, why wouldn't you try it? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make sense. You can't hurt anybody. Just try it, I guess, if you're really interested in that. But the fact of the matter is, like Jacob kind of said, you know, Tee Higgins could have gotten whatever he wanted out there on that open market. He would have been a wide receiver one on some team in the NFL. To have a guy, you know, not really have an ego and say, I'm willing to be number two as long as my number two is to Jamar Chase's one. You know, that specific situation, there's not many of that out there. And the fact of the matter is that the Bengals have a very cool situation here, and I think they should take advantage of it. And it's why that when the news that you know T switched agents to Jamar's agent, I think when that moment happened, everybody in this room specifically, and probably a lot of Bengals fans out there, thought it was a real possibility that he was going to stay because there's no other real reason to do that, right? I mean, maybe his agent stunk, his prior agent, but I don't think that was the case.
Mulligan is the best agent in football.
Correct. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think that would have ever been the case. He switched for a specific reason, and that reason was to stay in Cincinnati and play football with presumably one of his best friends and his teammate Jamar Chase.
He said spider. Casey had a great.
That scared the living shit out of me. I'm not going to lie. And I will bleep that out. No, I'm bleeping that out. That thing was coming down. It was in my face. And I had to be calm. But then I said, F it, forget it. Like, what the hell? Continue.
Casey had a great point on this. I was looking through agents trying to find teams with guys, star players under multiple guys under the same agent. I didn't see a whole lot of that across the league. But we also have to remember, if we're looking at that, at this time last year, T didn't have the same agent as Jamar. So if they're going to use this as a point of negotiation, we'll probably see this switch happen during negotiations, like we saw with Tee Higgins when that initial agent doesn't quite get the job done. Casey, I don't want to steal it from you. I'll let you give your take, but it was certainly, I think, in my opinion, the best comparison to what we saw here.
Yeah, it's really hard to even, figure out the exact scenario because you have to have the friendship there. You have to have similar position group.
And they have to be good.
And they have to be good, right? And the only one that came to my mind right away was the Lions with David Montgomery and
Jahmyr Gibbs.
Jahmyr Gibbs, sorry. And those two, David Montgomery's a little older, so there's probably a good likelihood, a good chance that the Lions, when his contract is up, want to move away from him. But at the same time, Jahmyr Gibbs will also be coming up. And so I think there's a chance that maybe they can work together. It's unfortunate because they're kind of far apart, right? Like they could tag Jahmyr Gibbs if they wanted to and let David walk. But this is such a unique situation that there's no other team in the league that has this scenario. You think of maybe like, is there a D lineman comparison, right? I thought of like the Eagles. Well, the Eagles already pay everyone, and like that mold.
They let their whole D-line go.
Yeah, they're letting guys go already. So, and again, the other thing too is the bond that you clearly see that's different between T, Jamar, and Joe. There's just nothing quite like it, and the rest of the league, who's not super dialed into Bengals every single day, where we get to watch them in training camp, where we get to watch every little clip, every little podcast that they get on. These guys are like tied to the hip. They are best friends inside the locker room, outside the locker room. And that scenario is just so unique in the NFL that the situation that happened over the week, it deserves more praise. And the reason why we're covering it in this segment is because this is unprecedented. Yeah. I think this is one of the first times in NFL history where I can remember a group of guys being signed at the same time, same position group, top dollar, basically. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that there's ever been something like that. I would have to do a little more research on that because there's been great receiver duos in the past.
Well, and they're both in their prime.
Yeah.
Which is the tough part. Like I love your example of Gibbs and Montgomery. I think that's probably the best one because you have the whole Sonic and Knuckles thing. They obviously get along very well. They're both very productive. But the big difference between that and T and Jamar is we just gave T and Jamar two four-year massive deals. The reason why that makes so much sense is because as Jahmyr Gibbs' contract expands, David Montgomery would be getting older and cheaper. So you'd be able to kind of move that money around to make it make sense for everybody. I'm hard-pressed to find another situation where it makes sense that this would take place. I mean, think about the other dominant receiver duos in the league. When Devontae Smith has 3 good games in a row, A.J. Brown's reading a book on the sideline and tweeting about how much he hates his life. When Tee Higgins has a good game, Jamar Chase is the first one to congratulate him on the sidelines. Jalen Waddle goes off for 2 weeks, Tyreek Hill requests a trade. Jamar goes off, Tee Higgins is buckling the chain around his neck when he gets to the bench. Like, these guys are such good friends, and that just doesn't exist, especially in this position group. It's so unique, and I know a lot of people want to use it as a negative against the Bengals front office. Oh, the players are in control. You have no control over your contracts, yada, yada, yada. If this is what it takes to extend good players in Cincinnati, by all means, let's do it. So I don't necessarily think package deals are going to become more prevalent. The thing I do think is going to become a lot more prevalent is star quarterbacks talking. I think people saw what Joe Burrow did this year, saw it made a difference, and whether you're a part of a cheap organization like the Bengals that you're trying to change, or you're part of a rich organization like the Dallas Cowboys that don't want to spend money, I don't think it matters. I think we're going to see star players be outspoken about roster decisions and what they want more often. I think we're already seeing it a little bit with Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott. When they reset their contracts, they talked about where they want that money spent. I think we're going to see that a lot around the league. I don't know as much about the package deals just because it's so hard to find.
So the question I have, I think Joe Burrow's getting too much credit for the Tee Higgins thing because I feel like the Bengals were willing to let T go whether Joe wanted him or not. I feel like this had more to do with Jamar Chase saying he is either extended or I'm not staying. I feel like that's what we kind of discussed yesterday too. What happens if Jamar doesn't go as much to bat for T? And by the way, it's not Jamar's responsibility to go to bat for T. I agree with you. This is a unique situation. It's not just that they're best friends. There's a lot of teammates on every single team, close teams that have friends on the roster that hang out and do all the stuff that you guys just mentioned. But there's not a lot of guys that are willing to go out on a limb and use their contract negotiation and not waste time, but use time in that to get every dollar they have coming to them to also make sure that they make the time to get their best friend and their teammate money too. That's why, as I said on my show yesterday, I was like, everyone knows, I poke at the Bengals, poke at Jamar Chase, this, that, and the other. There's nothing to poke on Jamar Chase on. As great of a talent as he is on the field, he's as good a person off the field. For him to use his leverage and to him to use his contract negotiation to make sure that you get Tee Higgins, that's something we've never seen. You're going to see teammates who want to play together and stay together moving forward on other teams. You won't see. I agree with you guys. I don't think you're going to see many situations where you have one of the best players in the league use their leverage to make sure that they get to remain playing with one of their best friends. I think that's very cool and unique. What happens, though, if he doesn't do that? Is Tee Higgins a Bengal today? If Jamar Chase doesn't use his leverage in that negotiation, is Tee Higgins a Bengal today? If you're asking me, I don't believe he is. That's why Joe Burrow doing that tour, I'm not saying it didn't work, but I also feel like if it worked, it wouldn't have taken Jamar Chase having to use that leverage in that negotiation to get that done if that's the case. If it truly was about making Burrow happy, Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins could have separate negotiations, and it would have just been sign here, both of you, and let's get on with this. It took Jamar Chase twisting their arm. I don't know if they did respond to the fear of Joe Burrow. I think the intention was to always get Jamar Chase done. I don't think they were anticipating having their arm twisted by Jamar Chase when it came to the Tee Higgins side. If he doesn't do that, is Tee Higgins a Bengal today, do you think?
As Kanye West said, and I know this gets dangerous right about now, but
boy.
I guess we'll never know.
What did he say, Jacob?
I guess we'll never know. So I'm glad we don't live in that world. I'm glad Jamar Chase did what he had to do and got Tee Higgins back. Whether Joe Burrow's pressure got Tee Higgins across the finish line or not, we don't know for sure. I would tend to side with you and say that it did not, that the Jamar Chase add-on as a package deal, that was the reason that it got across the finish line. However, I don't think the Joe Burrow outside pressure did nothing. Even if it moved their starting offer a little bit higher, a few more guarantees, still far from T's asking price. But if Joe Burrow's pressure just moved that a little bit, maybe that makes the relationship better at the start of those negotiations. Maybe they started low, and that Joe Burrow media tour bumped it up, and they came back with a second offer. And that helps the relationship as you progress through those negotiations. I think you're absolutely right that the package deal is what got this done. That's why they're still here in Cincy. Shout out to Jamar. Shout out to Rocky Arsenault for getting it done. It was one of the better Twitter notifications I've gotten in my entire life. But I do think that the Joe Burrow outside pressure did something. And whether or not that was a huge reason why this got done, I guess we can have that debate. But I do think that it made at least a little bit of a difference. I have a hard time believing it didn't.
I mean, we have the clip if you want to run it. I mean, we have the clip, of Tee Higgins saying that. I think it was a help. I don't think that Joe Burrow feels inclined to go out of his way and go on a week-long tour, saying how much he wants to pay his friends. I don't think he does that unless he feels he has to. Tee Higgins was asked about it yesterday, and I wanted to run the clip for you here, Justin. Maybe Tee Higgins will change your mind.
Do you guys feel like Joe's statements, whether it be publicly or privately, really helped make this happen for the three of you guys to be able to stay together?
I think it was a big help, him just putting out little information, having our back. I think that's the biggest thing, especially coming from a quarterback. It's different if me and T vouching for somebody else before our quarterback to vouch for us. I think that's given us, a pathway to get us where we got here.
I just think that there are a lot of teams out there that have had similar situations, maybe not to the extent that the Bengals had this offseason, but similar situations where you want to pay a wide receiver and the quarterback wants you to pay the wide receiver, but is the quarterback going to speak out? I've never seen it. I've never really seen it in my time watching the NFL. Joe Burrow doing what he did was a different thing, and I think it genuinely helped the Bengals, or helped Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase get their deals.
No, when you asked if what he said will change my mind, no, only because, hey, Jamar T, did Joe Burrow's efforts out there, help you get this deal done? What are they going to say? Nah, he's a bum. That didn't help at all. I like I said, if it worked, you don't franchise him for the second time. If it worked, you get it done.
They were always going to franchise him the second time. That was never a question.
But Joe Burrow said he wanted him last year. Joe Burrow was never once not saying he didn't want him. Joe Burrow was putting the pressure on him last year. If Joe Burrow's words truly worked, Jamar Chase wouldn't have had to blackmail him, if you will, or twist their arm to get it done at the end of the day, in my opinion. But it got done.
They were both necessary, is what I'm like. I don't even think T gets done with just the package deal if Joe Burrow's not saying that he's a need all the time.
Yeah.
So I think they were both necessary to get this across the finish line.
Fair enough. But it got done. All that matters.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, regardless of how it got done and opinions of whether it's good or not, up next is just results. It's who was it? It was Zach Taylor, I think, said it yesterday. Like right now, the next stage is you got to get a championship. Yep. It's the only way it's a feel-good story now, but the only way it remains that is if you have a Super Bowl to show for it. And I'm not saying it has to be next season, but at least, you know what I mean? Like what's that? How far do they have to get next year to keep that pressure off of this unit, whether Zach Taylor, whether Joe Burrow, because Joe Burrow will be viewed differently now, Zach Taylor, and right or wrong, that's not me hating. It's just, how this stuff works when this type of stuff happens. How far do they have to go next year, at the very least, for them to shake off some of that criticism that come from the outsiders, if you will?
Lucky for them, they missed the playoffs the last 2 years, so it's make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's
Just
I mean,
the bar's not high.
lucky for them, they have been terrible the last 2 years. So if they get in the playoffs, yeah, I mean, if they got in the playoffs last year with how bad the first 4 months of that season was, I would have talked myself into winning that Super Bowl in 30 seconds.
Yep.
So yeah, I would love for them. If you want me to give you a real line, it's compete for the division with Baltimore. If you don't win it, be within 2 games. Be the top wild card team unless someone else goes crazy, and then at least win 1 game in the playoffs. That's really my kind of bubble for this season at bare minimum.
Yeah, my line is the playoffs. If they don't make the playoffs in 3 straight years with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase,
then,
the Bengals have a lot of problems that honestly I don't even know if it can be fixed at that point.
I saw one of the PFF analysts was asking the question. They said, if you have the best quarterback in the league, or one of arguably the best quarterback in the league, and the best wide receiving room in the league, and the best offensive coach in the league, you'll never miss the playoffs. So one of those 3 things is not true.
Yeah.
We'll find out this year, I guess.
Yeah, if anything, I feel like it just puts so much more pressure on not Joe Burrow, not Jamar and T, Zach Taylor. Like it's really all this. Like Zach Taylor's cheesing away up there yesterday, but I feel like, dude, you have the look of a guy that might be coaching his final season. Because
I also think with how short his leash is, he had no chance if they didn't re-sign him. Like he was not lasting through an offensive rebuild at the same time as rebuilding this defense. Like there's no way he had a chance to survive that. So he's got to be the happiest of anyone that Jamar and T are signed. And then the biggest loser of all this, Carson Palmer. Bum.
Yeah, Carson, but he'll spin it. He'll find a way.
He will.
Well, yeah, like because I said earlier, like what's the furthest or what's the how far do the Bengals have to go to keep the pressure off of Joe Burrow and others or the criticism or whatever? I think that question is different than how far do they have to go for Zach Taylor's job to remain safe, because we could say, well, if they got to the divisional round, good for them. But if they get knocked out of the divisional round, trust me, just like every single Bengals loss over the last 3 or 4 years, it will end with, yeah, but that damn run play that Zach Taylor called in the second quarter, I mean, that's what did it. That's what cost him. Like, I feel like Zach's leash is way shorter than the pressure that comes with everyone else's. Not that anyone's going to be cut or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I think his leash is just short, possibly, heading into this year.
Come on, Kenner. There'd just be a call we'd all complain about.
Oh, I would never say that. I would never say that.